We start this next section on the Far East. And when I say the Far East, I'm overwhelmingly talking about China and Japan. Not that there aren't other countries that merit attention, but we have limited time in a general survey course, and these are the two major powers in the region, and so we'll have to focus on them. And like I usually do when starting a new section, let me mention or cover some of the basic large scale physical features upon or atop which we'll start looking at some critical cultural events that have shaped the modern uh, Far East. All right. As you can see here, we have a basic climate map of Eurasia. And being on the same physiographic continent as Europe and the Middle East, what separates China from these other major cultural centers on the continent of Eurasia is, of course, the great center of the Eurasian continent, which I'm marking off here with the cursor. And as you can see by the light color in this particular map, that indicates that the great center of Asia is primarily arid in climate. In fact, there's a term that you need to know. It's called a continental climate or continentality, and you have here a definition. All right, it's the type of climate experienced in the interior of great, primarily temperate continents, resulting in a wide range of temperatures, both diurnally, which of course means daily, and seasonally. Isolation from moisture-bearing winds from the maritime periphery of the continent results in this arid climate that is characterized by low precipitation, of course low humidity, and great variation in temperature. The reason why you get a great variation in temperature diurnally and seasonally is because you do not have a lot of moisture in the atmosphere. Water, by and large, has a high specific heat, which means it takes a lot of energy to heat something up, or it takes a longer time for it to cool down as a function of having water present. In any case. All right. Now, okay, so we have the Eurasian continent with this great center of aridity in it, where you find a continental climate. And as you can see, when we flip back to this particular map, China, of course, is located over here on the eastern periphery, and including that central arid zone. It's to the east of the arid zone that you find the great core of China, and that's where you tend to find good cropland. In fact, you can infer that by simply looking at this particular map here. This is a map of China, a map of rainfall or precipitation in China, and you can see how precipitation is overwhelmingly, all right, distributed in the eastern portion of the country. As you move further to the west, you run into the dry and arid portions of the country. In that sense, China is not unlike the United States. The United States also has a rather humid, well-watered eastern portion of the country. The western portion is remarkably more arid by and large. Same thing for China, in any case. Now, if that's the precipitation pattern, clearly showing a bias, if you would, towards the east-southeast of the country, that is going to be mimicked in population distribution, which you can see here. All right. As you can see, the population distribution is remarkably consistent with the distribution of rainfall, all right, or the ability, or the, if you would, the access to fresh water, right? You can see me flipping back between these two maps, all right? That just shows you that humanity is a creature that must be around fresh water. Makes sense. Humanity is primarily comprised of water. In fact, you can consider the human to be an ambulatory bag of water that's gained consciousness of itself. In any case. Now, so we're talking about that great population of China, and we're talking about a population that is, shall we say, in what this year, let's say it's 2000, it is 2020, is going to be roughly speaking about 1.4, maybe 1.42 billion people. And what that means is approximately 18 to 22% of all humans live in China, somewhere in there, give or take. You'll never know the exact size of the population like this. Nevertheless, somewhere in there. Now, making, of course, China, therefore, the largest country in the world in terms of population. Now, we know that the population of China is disproportionately concentrated in the eastern portion of the country where you find higher precipitation. And we know that historically, obviously, but even today, the majority of Chinese are still attached to the rural landscape. Don't get me wrong, that's radically changing at the moment. I probably won't be able to make that statement in the next few years, given that the world's largest migration in the world has been happening in China over the last 2 decades, and that's from the rural portions of China to the urban portions of China. And so we'll allow the demographers to make that call, but China is rapidly urbanizing. Nevertheless, for the sake of testing, still the majority of Chinese are attached to the rural countryside. Now, if you have a large population, be it a majority or not, that's attached to the countryside, practicing traditional agriculture, they're going to be dependent on the characteristics of that physical environment more so than an urban population. And farmers like level land, prefer it. You can do farming in mountainous areas, but you prefer level land. Farming in mountainous areas is less efficient, problematic, more costly. You have to terrace, it's a pain in the neck. You'd rather have level land. And so if we're talking about a large historical core of China, you can figure out where that's going to be. Most of China, as you can see by this image here, is rather hilly or mountainous. But there is a large area of relatively flat lands in the eastern portion of China where you have sufficient moisture, and that is this area over here, which you can consider the core zone of China. In fact, you can see I've labeled on here the ancient core of China listed. You can see China's 3 largest cities, which is Shanghai, Tianjin, and Beijing. They're all located, roughly speaking, in those level lands in the central eastern portion of the country where there is sufficient precipitation. And of course, you can see the 2 major rivers of China. Roughly speaking, you can consider that core zone to be imperfectly, of course, but located roughly between the 2 critical rivers in the eastern portion of the country, and that's the Huanghe River, often referred to as the Yellow River, because of the quantity of sediment that's being carried in the river, giving it a brown, often yellowish appearance, not unlike the Mississippi being referred to as the Big Muddy in any case. All right, you have the Huanghe River here to the north and the famous Yangtze River to the south, more or less, however imperfectly. The ancient core of China is the land between these 2 rivers, however imperfectly. Now, back to the precipitation map. If the principal livelihood up until recently, and I said arguably even today, but changing rapidly, if the principal economic activity is agriculture, you would expect, therefore, that this area, historically and even today, been dominated by settled farmers. In fact, that's what you would see historically. Traditional intensive crop agriculture in the eastern portion of the country. All right? And you might put that down, put it this way. If we have farmers in the eastern portion of the country over here, as you would move towards the northwest, as you can see, it's getting drier. as indicated by the precipitation map here. It's getting drier and drier. Therefore, when you move into this portion of China, heading increasingly in this direction to the more arid locations in the central portion of the continent, but as you move into this area, you get less precipitation. That means the vegetation profile changes, and what you get is increasingly grasslands. All right, we've talked about this before in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere. What you have is a transition zone in here where you have grasslands, which means the economic livelihood of the population is going to have to change. And what type of livelihood thrives on grasslands historically? A pastoral economy. In fact, you can see a herder here. Since you can't do intensive agriculture, since intensive agriculture requires access to consistent and large quantities of water, all right, you have to make your livelihood off of the grass. Therefore, you're going to make your livelihood off of the animals that eat the grass, and this is what you have as you move into this arid portion of the country, a pastoral economy. You can see that here. Farmers that I've marked off over here. And then as you move into this transitional zone, you have herders or pastoralists, right? People running cattle. What population do you type, culturally speaking? What is occurring with respect to the transformation of the population? Well, by and large, as you move into these historically herding population zones in here, you're talking about Mongols, and I put up that photo before, all right? These are lands traditionally dominated by Mongols. And the reason why I mentioned that is this. You have this traditional farming population over here. You have Mongol herders in this portion of the continent. Now, there's a line between them, shall we say, an isohyet, whatever, a division line, and you might say that, roughly speaking, you consider this the dividing line between humid cultures to the east and arid cultures to the west. All right? But this is a statistical average line. It's not a consistent feature of the landscape. It is a statistical average. And what I mean is that in any 40, 50-year period, this line will migrate to the east for 100 miles. Or an opposite to period, it would migrate to the west-northwest 100 miles. This is just a statistical average division line. And the reason why I mention that, because it'll generate a test question that you cannot miss. What would you expect when this aridity line moves 100 miles, say, to the west for a period of decades? All right, you would expect that the farmers, of course, would slowly migrate into these regions looking for opportunity. They can now practice agriculture. Fine, nothing sophisticated about that. But what's going to happen when that aridity line moves further towards the east, southeast? What's going to happen is the herders or the pastoralists are going to migrate into these lands to take advantage of those opportunities as well, especially since that growing amount of aridity might mean that conditions deeper in Asia are even harsher, forcing them further to the east. But the reason why I mention that is, who are these people migrating to the east? They're Mongols. And of course, if you're familiar with Mongols historically, they're a fierce horse culture, fierce horse warriors. They rode small ponies, extremely mobile, obviously. They would construct the largest single world empire that the world had ever known in the 14th century. And the last thing you wanted to see if you were in the central portion of China is the arrival of Mongols, who came in periodically, threatening the viability of China. Why do I make that observation in terms of precipitation and climate zones and migrating populations? Because therefore now you understand what the Great Wall of China was. You can see the Great Wall of China here. This is a simplification of the Great Wall of China. It's actually broken up into various parts. It's about more or less 1,500 miles. It's not built over an extremely hilly landscape. And as you can see, it generally mirrors that division line between pastoral East Asia and intensive farming East Asia, between Mongol East Asia and the core of China. All right, it's a fascinating structure built over many centuries. I believe started in the 3rd century BC during the Qin dynasty. I mean, it's a big thing. It's not merely a wall, it's essentially a running building over a very hilly mountainous landscape. It was only partially effective, but it indicates by its sheer proportions the concern of the core of China with respect to the periodic visits of Mongols.